The house stood like a wound against the neighborhood's carefully manicured lawns, its peeling paint and overgrown yard telling stories that respectable families preferred to forget. Sarah's hand trembled on the car door handle as Marcus turned off the engine, his knuckles white against the steering wheel, and in that moment of heavy silence, she understood that this wasn't just a first date. This was an excavation of everything he'd spent years trying to bury. Most first dates happened in coffee shops or restaurants, safe, neutral territories where people could present their most polished versions of themselves, where conversations stayed light, and the biggest risk was ordering something that got stuck in your teeth. But Marcus had driven her here instead, to this broken-down house on the forgotten side of town, and Sarah could see the fear and hope warring in his eyes as he waited for her reaction. She'd known him for 3 weeks through a community volunteer program, had felt drawn to the quiet intensity in his smile, and the way he listened like every word mattered. But nothing had prepared her for this moment of raw, terrifying honesty. "I need you to see this," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Before we go any further, before you decide anything about me, I need you to see where I came from." He stepped out of the car, and Sarah followed, her heels sinking slightly into the cracked concrete driveway. The October wind carried the scent of dying leaves and something else, something that smelled like neglect and survival mixed together into a haunting perfume. The front door hung slightly crooked on its hinges, and Marcus had to shoulder it open with practiced force. Inside, the air was stale and cold, and Sarah could see where furniture had once stood by the faded rectangles on the worn carpet. But Marcus wasn't looking at the emptiness. He was staring at a water-stained wall near the kitchen entrance, his jaw tight with memories that clearly still had teeth. If you believe in the power of honesty, in second chances, and in the courage it takes to show someone your broken pieces, please hit that like button, leave a comment below, share this story, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. Marcus walked through the house like a man touring a battlefield years after the war had ended. He stopped in what must have been the living room and turned to Sarah with eyes that glistened in the dim light, filtering through the dirty windows. "My father used to come home drunk and mean," he began, his voice steady despite the pain flickering across his face. "Not every night, but enough that I learned to read the sound of his footsteps on the porch, learned to tell from the way he turned the doorknob whether I should hide or pretend to be asleep. My mom worked 2 jobs trying to keep us afloat, and when she wasn't working, she was too exhausted to do anything but survive. This house, it was supposed to be filled with love and laughter and all those things they show in movies. Instead, it was filled with shouting and silence, and I never knew which was worse." Sarah stood perfectly still, afraid that any movement might shatter the fragile trust Marcus was offering. She watched as he moved to the kitchen, running his hand along the chipped countertop. "I used to do my homework right here," he continued, with one ear always listening for the sound of his truck in the driveway. "I got straight A's, not because I was naturally smart, but because studying was the only thing I could control. Every good grade felt like proof that I wasn't doomed to repeat his mistakes, that I could be something different, something better." He led her down the narrow hallway to a small bedroom that still had faded superhero stickers on the wall. "This was my room," Marcus said, and Sarah could hear the boy he'd been in his voice, scared and determined in equal measure. "I used to lie in that corner over there and dream about the man I'd become. I made promises to that scared kid every single night. I promised him that one day we'd get out, that we'd build a life so different from this that people would never believe we came from here. And I kept those promises, Sarah. I put myself through college working 3 jobs. I became a social worker because I wanted to help kids who were lying in corners just like I did, making the same desperate promises to themselves." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face without realizing she'd started crying. Marcus turned to look at her, and in his expression, she saw vulnerability and strength woven together so tightly they'd become indistinguishable. "I brought you here on our first date because I can't do this again," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I've had relationships where I hid this part of myself, where I pretended I came from somewhere nicer, somewhere easier. And every single time the relationship was built on sand because they didn't know the real me. They knew the polished version, the successful social worker with the nice apartment and the master's degree. But they didn't know about the nights I still wake up with my heart pounding, listening for footsteps that aren't there anymore. They didn't know about the work I've done in therapy, the battles I've fought to not become my father, the daily choice I make to break the cycle. He stepped closer to Sarah, his hands shaking as he reached for hers. I'm 32 years old, and I'm still learning how to accept love without waiting for it to turn cruel. I'm still learning that raising my voice doesn't mean I'm becoming him, that making a mistake doesn't mean I'm irredeemable. And I brought you here because if you're going to run, I need you to run now, before I fall completely in love with you, before I start believing that maybe I deserve the kind of happiness I've spent my whole life helping other people find. Sarah's throat was tight with emotion, but she squeezed his hands and held on. Why me? She managed to ask. Why did you trust me with this? Marcus smiled, and it was the saddest, most beautiful smile Sarah had ever seen. Because 3 weeks ago, at the community center, I watched you spend 2 hours helping that elderly woman fill out housing applications. And when she got frustrated and started crying, you didn't offer empty comfort. You sat with her in her pain, and then you helped her find a way through it. You saw her as fully human, with all her complications and fears. And I thought, this is someone who might be able to see me the same way. Not as a tragic backstory or a redemption arc, but as a whole person who's still becoming. They stood in that empty house for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, surrounded by ghosts and possibilities. Sarah thought about her own life, comfortable and uncomplicated, and realized that Marcus was offering her something more precious than ease. He was offering her truth. She thought about how easy it would be to walk away, to find someone with less baggage, fewer nightmares, and a childhood home that looked better in photographs. But she also thought about courage, and how it came in many forms. Sometimes courage was escaping a terrible situation, and sometimes courage was letting someone see you completely and trusting them not to weaponize your vulnerability. Take me through the rest of the house, Sarah said finally, her voice firm. Tell me everything. Show me every room, every memory, every piece of who you are. Because I'm not running, Marcus. I'm staying. And not because I want to fix you or save you. You've already done that yourself. I'm staying because you're the bravest person I've ever met. And I want to see what kind of future a man this honest and this strong can build. Marcus's face crumbled with relief and disbelief, and he pulled Sarah into a hug that felt like a promise and a prayer. They spent the next hour walking through that broken house, and with every story Marcus shared, Sarah felt herself falling deeper into something that felt less like infatuation and more like recognition. She was seeing someone strip themselves bare of pretense, offering up their wounds and their victories with equal honesty, and it was the most intimate thing she'd ever experienced. As the sun began to set, painting the dirty windows with gold light, Marcus locked the front door one last time. I bought this house 6 months ago, he admitted as they walked back to the car. It was in foreclosure, abandoned and forgotten, just like it felt when I lived here. I've been slowly fixing it up on weekends. I'm going to turn it into a safe house for teenagers aging out of foster care, a place where they can stay while they get on their feet, where they can learn that your beginning doesn't have to be your ending. Sarah stopped walking and turned to face him fully. That's what you're building here? Out of all this pain, you're building hope for other people? Marcus shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. Someone showed me that broken things can be rebuilt. A teacher, actually, who saw past my anger and fear and gave me a chance. I'm just paying it forward. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that our wounds can become our wisdom and our struggles can become our strength, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment. Tell us about a time when someone saw the real you and chose to stay. Tell us what courage means to you. In that moment, standing outside a house that held both horror and healing, Sarah understood that love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone brave enough to be imperfect out loud. She thought about all the first dates she'd been on, all the carefully curated conversations in carefully chosen restaurants, and realized that none of them had ever come close to this raw, real, revolutionary honesty. 3 months later, Sarah stood in her driveway looking at her BMW and made a decision. She sold the car and bought something more practical, donating a substantial portion of the difference to the children's hospital in Lily's name. She also started volunteering at the pediatric ward every week, bringing art supplies and spending time with sick children, reading them stories and helping them forget their pain, even if just for a moment. She had learned the most important lesson of her life from a man in an old Honda Civic, that true wealth isn't measured by what you own, but by what you give, and that the most beautiful souls often come in the most unexpected packages. And every time she saw Emma laugh and play, and live the childhood that Lily never got to finish, Sarah whispered a prayer of gratitude for the angel who had judged her daughter worthy of saving, even when Sarah herself had been so quick to judge him.